Welcome. My name is Garrett Schmidt, and I'm the CEO and managing editor of VBC Exhibit Hall. And I'd like to welcome you all to today's live webinar discussion. And this one is hosted by Beacon Health. And it is called How AI Agents Can Power the Modern Value-Based Team. We've got a great and exciting discussion in front of us. I'm really excited about it. So a couple housekeeping items before we get started, though. Everyone has joined in listen-only mode today, so you don't need to worry about turning off your microphone or your camera. But we are going to have some time for some audience questions, hopefully towards the end. So if you have a question at any point for either of our speakers or any of our speakers, go ahead and use your control module to drop those questions in. We're going to get to as many as we can. If for some reason we're not able to get to yours, don't worry. Someone will make sure to reach out via email to get your question answered. So even if we're wrapping up at the very end, just go ahead and drop your question in. Also, the session today is being recorded. So when we're done, maybe about an hour or so afterwards, you'll receive an email to where you can access the link to the recording as well as to the slides. And we're going to have some slides that you can follow that link to as well. So without further ado, I wanted to briefly introduce our speakers today. And with us, we have Mr. Mark Pothen. He is the Vice President of Healthcare Sales. There we go. There they are. And the CEO of Beacon Health and head of product and GTM at Steadywell and Cape AI, early employee with Xwell. We have Dr. Jenny Chiang with us, and she's the SVP at Tufts Medicine Integrated Network, and she's the former CEO of Metro West Healthcare Alliance, IPA. And then we have Dr. Karthik Ravindran, and he is the owner of Kaaya Healthcare and CMO of Beacon Health. And he's previous national medical director at Carbon Health and owning BBC Population Health. So they definitely know what they're talking about. And I will turn it over to you, Mark, to lead the discussion. So welcome, guys.
Perfect. Hello. So I think that what I'm gonna go, we're gonna go through a few things, and we're gonna move a little bit quickly, but it's fine. So I think that last time we had in our first webinar, we talked a little about where we think the big and hairy problems in delivering a value-based care model actually are, and where there's room for improvement. I think in this talk specifically, we're going to walk through the actual solution sets and the solutions that are now possible as a function of using AI to go and do some of this stuff. And so I think maybe some ground rules, and maybe to give you guys a structure, is that we're going to walk through first what is the state of the world, and I'm going to have Karthik and Jenny walk through kind of where ACOs are playing, what practices, what exactly is happening there, to defining out what AI has done in the last 5 years and where we're at now, thinking about what is now possible with AI. And then from there, we're going to walk through actual examples of those things occur, actual examples of where value could be generated and where we can get to the actual workflow using AI, and how that impacts patients, what the future of practices looks like because of that. And so with that being said, I think that 2 or 3 definitions really quickly is because, and I'll weave in while we're talking as well. But one is a point solution. All point solutions is a specific, let's say that we wanted to own prior authorizations or owning referrals or these specific pieces. You might have somebody who actually does that for you, and we'll actually take some polling questions in the middle just to figure out where you guys are at. But 2, what was the other thing that I wanted to find really quickly? Damn, I'm trying to remember. Oh, I'm sure we'll come back to it.
Point of care solution, or a point solution. There were some AI terms that you maybe want to go to, but I think we could start with the poll question and then roll into the definitions as we use them.
Yeah. Okay. Garrett, I think you're in here somewhere. I'm not.
Yeah,
Garrett,
I'm here.
Okay, perfect. Garrett's God. I can hear him, but I can't really see him or know that
apparition.
He's there.
You have to summon me
exactly.
Like an apparition. Yeah.
Exactly. So if you could do the polling question for whether or not people, or specifically are people using agents right now? And what
or
points,
do
how many point solutions they're using?
Or do you want to do the demographic question of risk-based contracts?
Yeah. Let's do the demographic question, then we can kind of click into it if we want to.
Sounds good. Here we go. So on your screen, everybody, you will see a question pop up. And this is anonymous, by the way. This is just for fun, kind of give us a feel for who's in the audience today. And we'll show the results here once everyone has had a chance to look at it. And the question is to describe your risk-based contracts. Is it are you guys in an upside and downside arrangement? Are you an upside only currently? Are you unsure that you think you are in one, but you're just not sure what exactly the arrangement is? Or that it's not applicable? Because I know we've got some all kind of folks with us on the call today. So we will give it another maybe 5 long seconds for folks to answer, and then we
And
will
just to
show
let
the
people know,
results
we
here.
only have 2 questions, so don't worry, it's not going to be one of those.
Yeah, we're not going to overwhelm you.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I'm going to shut it down in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Okay, Jenny and Karthik, are you able to see the results here? For those who may be calling in or can't see, would you mind reading the percentages for us?
Sure. So it looks like for this, our viewers who participated, we have about 38% who are in upside and downside risk contracts, 13% in upside only, 13% unsure, and 38% who are not applicable. So that just gives us a better idea of where folks are in terms of the solutions that might be needed as we play in the value-based care space. So thank you for that, Garrett.
Cool. Do we want to go do the next one, or do we want to wait on that one?
Well, Mark, what's the next slide that you have?
Yeah, so I think that the next slide was basically framing what is the state of the world right now, right? And so I think that like in that is specifically like where are we at? And I'm gonna let Karthik explain why we have this GIF because we were talking about it last night. So I'll let Karthik take it away, and then I'll like kind of weave some questions in while we're talking.
Okay, well, I was telling Mark and Jenny yesterday that I'm only here where I am because of The Simpsons. All my knowledge and skill set comes from that. But you know, when we were talking about what defines a point solution and how it interplays in the day-to-day practice operations, value-based operations, it came to mind, and this is from an old episode where it spoofs the assassination of Huey Long in the Louisiana State courthouse. But essentially, what happens is with point solutions is this: you have a discrete problem, right? One of these bullets that his son-in-law shot at him, that goes out there, and each point solution is that guy that's jumping in front of that bullet, right? It doesn't solve the bigger problem, right? Huey Long still gets shot. But what it does, we end up hiring or paying for distinct, 50 of these people to jump in front of those bullets sequentially, and it doesn't tie together in sort of elegant way. So in the end, if a point solution is just a point, it doesn't actually solve the problem. Huey Long still dies, and that unfortunately is sort of the state of today. And what I think Mark's gonna go into more detail is like, how do you create a system where Huey Long doesn't get assassinated?
Yeah. And so that seems like at the specific practice level, it's like we're getting all these point solutions, and there's no actual way to, one, string them together, and two, a lot of them also are like a software layer where it's actually saying like, hey, here's the thing to give to your staff to actually make them more efficient. We might like give them, like an AI receptionist, and it gives them another portal to log into. It gives them like additional work that's now on their plate. And actually, Karthik, you put it really well yesterday, which was like, oh, well, like your staff will just do that, right? As if like magically we're gonna gain additional staff that can now go do the work to actually onboard onto their tool. And so I guess like, Jenny, what are like the things that you see at the ACO level where this plays out? Because at the individual practice, like obviously you're buying these individual solutions, but the actual complexity compounds the more and more practices you're dealing with, and especially across a bunch of different practices.
Yeah, Mark, I appreciate that question. And just to be like, we are the three of us sort of enjoying our free time just talking about these problems, and so this is just an extension. We're sort of inviting you into like our living room space as we sort of ponder some of the issues. I can say from a population health standpoint, what we want to do as clinicians and what we are asked to do for value-based contracting isn't always totally aligned, and I think that does get to be challenging at the end user client, patient, and provider standpoint. But at a system level, when I think about our value-based care contracts, upside and downside risk, we tend to bucket the work, right? We tend to bucket quality work into metrics that we follow, that we have to dig up: A1Cs, blood pressures, colon cancer screenings, breast cancer screenings. And so there are these discrete metrics, but then there's also utilization, right? How do we think about avoidable ED visits and ambulatory sensitive conditions? And then there's the, how do we decrease the total cost of care? And so we have these key performance indices that we use as proxies to try to drive performance so that we can do well, decrease our downside risk, increase our upside risk, but we end up gaming the system in each of those places, right? So we know that part of the efficiency sort of bucket of money is related to risk adjustment and risk coding. And so we find a solution for how we can actually improve our risk coding. So we know that a lot of systems, I think, are using sort of population health management tools, companies, software, whatever the ranges of who you're working with. But what we end up doing is we end up siloing things. For example, in some big systems, transitional care management, the TCMs of when people are coming out of the acute care setting, are only being done by select care of nurse care managers, right? And we're sort of segmenting the population, which is really what population health is about, right? How do you segment the population and get people the care that they need? But in that, we end up with risk adjustment doing their own thing. If there's some sort of AI issue, you've got the medical, the large language model that's trying to capture what's happening in the office, doesn't necessarily tie to the quality metrics all the time. The risk coding doesn't link to the quality metrics. But one example of sort of this disjointedness is that the patient comes in, you have a PCP annual wellness visit, you talk about a breast cancer survivor who's had a mastectomy, and the quality metric requires you to actually code that status post bilateral mastectomy, otherwise they fall into the metric, right? And so you actually need the quality metric to be met by a coding solution, but none of that talks. So we spend a lot of our time, Mark, I think, in this space really doing a lot of data grabbing. Like, where can you find the data? How can you prove to your payer that you've done all the things that they're asking for? And meanwhile, the PCP on the ground, which Karthik is going to speak to, is like, I don't have time to chase all of this stuff. But these are the expectations that we've set up. And so I think along the way, we have found very clever, very good, best-in-class point solutions, but we're not quite there yet in terms of maximizing our value-based care performance.
Yeah, and I think the part that gets forgotten when we talk about all these point solutions too is that within that space, there is a disenfranchisement of the provider-patient interaction, right? Like ultimately, payers and money and value-based care, whatever it is, ultimately it still hinges on that interaction, right? On some level. And what comes of that is now in that moment, in that micro moment there, one is supposed to do all of that huge funnel that Jenny talked about, the mastectomy coding and the blah, 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 and this and that, and then still pretend like you're paying attention to the patient in front of you and actually talking about, oh, you survived breast cancer, you know, and that mismatch is part of where some of the, I think, the burnout that exists, because it's not what people train for, it's not what people go to school for, it's not why people go into primary care for. So you have to, exactly. And that leads downstream to people leaving their jobs and going into whatever's, and then it accelerates the downstream processes. So I mean, it's hard to metricize that, but I think that is the unfortunate nature of it, because you still require that provider to actually sit there and put that code in. So the bottleneck becomes that provider, and the provider is making a decision in that moment. Okay, I can give my patient 100% of my attention, or I can, code a bunch of crap and then, do whatever I need to do, right? I mean, that's the thing. I know what you're saying, but I mean, I think the problem is, to a provider in that moment, the feeling is coding equals, or, clicking equals care. And that's not the way providers think. Exactly. In that moment. So we need to create solutions that allow us to do what, we're good at, which is provide care, while allowing that clicking stuff to kind of happen in the back end.
Exactly. And if you guys don't have any other thoughts about this, I'm actually going to transition. This is actually a really good leaping off point to and I'm going to walk through really quickly a brief history of like, what does AI have and agents have anything to do with this? And actually, maybe Garrett, I know you're in the background. Specifically, I know that like we have one of the questions teed up, which is like, is anyone using agents right now? Does anyone know what that is? Maybe we can pull that up really quickly, just so that I can maybe contextualize this a little bit more.
Yeah, sure.
And
Okay,
this is
so
the last participation that we have. So
that's right. That's right. In case these polls are driving you up the wall. Okay, so here we go. In your day-to-day workflow, how many point solutions do you use? And this could include prior auth, revenue cycle management, scheduling, phone services, et cetera. Jenny, you may have some more examples that you want to throw out there.
I mean, or Mark, like any of these where you think you might be leveraging either, referrals. It doesn't have to be AI necessarily, but it's perhaps a vendor that you've outsourced, or a company that you're partnering with.
It could be software, it could be humans,
management, like, behavioral health, right? I mean, you can basically atomize everything that you do, right?
Yeah, so the choices here are 0, like you're not really using any of those right now, or 1 to 2, or 3+ if you're using a handful of them. So, all right, I think most of the results have come in, so we'll close it down another 5 seconds here, and same deal, I'll show the results, and Jenny, if you wouldn't mind, or one of you wouldn't mind reading the results, that'd be great. Here we go, closing it down. All right, are you able to see it on your screen?
Yeah, it looks like 73% are using 3+ or more point solutions, with 13% with 1 to 2 and 13% at 0. So this is the trend that we're seeing. We are seeing, thank you, Garrett, we could probably pull that down. This is the trend, is that we are recognizing in the healthcare system that that technology can improve workflows, can remove cognitive loads that are not necessarily high cognitive function, but still weigh on us. So Mark's going to go through some of these definitions, because I think for some of us, myself included, some of these terms are new. So it's really interesting to learn about where technology is headed.
Totally. So like, I think that there's a lot of, specifically in the case where like we have all these point solutions, there's a lot of people who are saying like, oh, we're building AI agents that can basically do all of this stuff, right? And I think that like, in order to understand what like an agent is and maybe define some of that, I want to give you maybe like a sense of the last 4 years of like where AI has gone and what has happened, and give you a pattern match to be able to like understand that. So the first thing was like LLMs, right? So those are large language models, similar to what you would think about like for ChatGPT, Anthropic, there's like a million of them out there. And what this allows you to do is take vast corpuses of information and synthesize that really well, or generate text in line with that. And that led directly to voice, right? Like now you have AI receptionists, speech to text, scribes, things like that, that are now able to actually not only synthesize that information, but do things with it. And you can do and play games on top of that as well. And now, like next is vision, which is, all right, like image and video generation models that have gotten super advanced and also allow for you to see what is going on, and use AI to like actually think about or quantify that. Like for example, now actually there's, if you look at like Gemini, which is Google's model, there's somebody who did an experiment where in a televisit, they actually built a large language model that was viewing that patient and trying to capture specific information about like their vitals, and it was able to like do a really, really good job. And so now you have like vision models that are able to like better quantify how patients are performing. And the last development, I think, which is like more of this last like even 6 months, has been like computer usage agents, which is kind of the cutting edge. And all that means is that it is an agent that can use a computer in the way that a human could, because the way that we've encoded all of software, or like any, like think of like software or solutions or anything, the like way that we have interacted, how you get to an outcome is by a human sitting on that computer, going and like clicking on certain things and to get to that outcome. And now, like if you have an agent that can plug in and use that computer in the way that a human would, you can click, you can type, you can read screens, you can do all sorts of things, right? And so I think that like the question now, the question now is, well, and actually a second point is that this is not robotic process automation. There's a lot of companies that have like pre-scripted steps. Think of it as like the difference between putting a blindfold on somebody and giving them directions, the moment that they hit something that they don't understand, they stop. Whereas like if you give somebody like an ability to walk around and see what's going on and reason towards the next step, they can understand the goals that they have to go and execute on and use software and make decisions just like a human would. They can recover from errors, handle these edge cases. And I think it's like that opens up a lot of interesting stuff because now, and I think this is kind of like where I'll invite Jenny and Karthik back in, you can start to redefine what is actually possible because these types of agents can start to own workflows on top of an EHR just like a human would, right? And do the work that otherwise you would have expected like point solutions to actually give you a better, like give you efficiency to go and doing, or two, it like allows for you to own these workflows from end to end, you know? And so I think that like what I kind of want to invite Karthik and Jenny on really quickly is like what now becomes possible. We frame the state of the world. It's like, hey, here, one, there's all these point solutions, and two, like there's all of this like human labor that gets used to solve a lot of these problems that a lot of the time, it's not even that like it's a human labor that right now does not exist, especially at the practice level, to go and do a lot of this work. And so like I kind of want to give you guys the ability to just react and come in. Yeah, go ahead, Karthik. I can see Karthik.
And even that human solution is not like it beyond the cost. It actually, you still have to train the human to do the thing that you want to do and understand the big picture. So there's an execution cost on top of the regular cost. I mean, I think the you know what it can do, and it's fairly amazing actually, frankly, is it seems fairly unlimited, right? I mean, like when Mark first started talking to me about this, you know, on the outside I nodded, but on the inside I was rolling my eyes because it seemed almost too good to be true. But then we actually started to implement some of these processes where you take, like, you know, like I said, instead of taking a particular point solution, but actually taking your end goal and then mapping out what it is to get from this point to that point and tying all of those atomic actions together to create this chain that leads you to the actual goal without input on my side is fairly amazing. I mean, he's got a list here of things you can do, but you know, I don't know, Jenny, if you wanted to add anything before we.
Well, do you want to define atomic action for folks, just in terms of breaking it?
My definition wasn't that great yesterday. I mean, but an atomic action, right? So like if we take anything, right? Like right now, like this morning, for me to get ready for, you know, to get up for this meeting, I had to get out of bed. I had to go to the shower. I had to brush my teeth. I had to go downstairs and do whatever. So each of those domains is an atomic action, right? That's like somebody coming to the office and they need to get their insurance verified. They may have some care gaps open. They've got you know, things that were ordered last time that didn't get closed in, and then you have the actual visit and you have the post visit and the bill. Like there's a whole spectrum of distinct pieces involved in getting out of bed, right? So each of those distinct pieces is the atom, the actual atomic action. You have to, for me to get up and get ready in the morning, I have to string those things in some sort of logical way to get to where I am, right? And that's sort of how a practice, or not even a practice, it's like actually a system operates. It's just, it functions almost like an organism in that sense, right? I don't know if, Mark, that clarifies what an atomic action is, if you guys want to give a more technical answer than that.
No. I think it's good. Jenny, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think it's just the way we think about how we operationalize things, right? And so when we start thinking about where the tools fit in, a lot of times people will say, well, are we just trying to replace all the humans? And my answer is no. Actually, I think what makes medicine and primary care, obviously I'm biased as a family doctor, is that relationship. And so how can we think about which atomic actions need to be done by humans, which ones are those connection points, and which ones are actions that we can offload, which I think most of us in our day-to-day are thinking about, at least in value-based care, of like those discrete data points that are being asked of us by VBC, we have, a lot of us have broken it down into sort of discrete entities or problems that we're trying to solve. And but we don't string them together necessarily in a way that is thoughtful, or they're not strong. We're not getting the outcomes that we want, right? I think that's part of the issue, is that we know that costs continue to rise, patients' experiences haven't gotten any better, and I think, again, I sort of sit on the outside and I watch Mark and Karthik play in the sandbox and build things, but what I find fascinating about the computer usage stuff is I think it really is an opportunity to return the joy to medicine and to the practice of medicine, while also simultaneously performing on value-based care contracts, right? And I think that's that really sweet spot of how do you provide, and Mark says this all the time, that he wants to create a concierge-like experience for the patient and the physician or the clinician to be able to do all the things that are expected, but also maintain the integrity of what primary care really was meant to be. And so one of the examples that I love, that I think ties together, which we'll get to, I think, is just the taking care of patients with diabetes, right? What is the best way for us to take care of patients with diabetes? What are all those atomic actions that need to happen to prove to the payer that we're doing good care for patients with diabetes? But how do you also make the experience seamless for the patient, right? Like how do you make sure that the lab order is in when they want to go, and that they can get their lab appointment scheduled if that's what they want, and that there's the follow-up and the lab results get back to the PCP's office so that it can then be input into the whatever database you're using to send back to the payer. So there's this elegance to this. I mean, it's also terrifying, Mark. I'm just going to tell you, like, thinking about like the robots being like just like any other human in your office. Like, I think that's a little bit too much. I mean, I don't want robots taking over the world, but this idea that there is a depth of problem solving and then connection that really fascinates me about the computer usage work.
And, I mean, all that to say is, like, it's like Jenny said, it's not to replace anybody. If anything, it's just to elevate the experience, right? Because I was giving Mark the example yesterday. So in the mornings, I got to go downstairs, make breakfast for my kids, make sure that everything's packed, right? Those are all mindless actions. The kids are there, they're wanting breakfast, they want to interact with me. That is the patient provider experience, right? That is what I, as a parent, actually want to do. That is what the kids want, right? And that is what's going to lead to like good outcomes and them not having to talk about me to their therapist 30 years from now, right? But the problem is I got to still pack that stupid peanut butter sandwich. So if you can create the experience where the agent is doing the grab that peanut butter sandwich, put it in the bag, make sure the bag is packed, and then I can sit down and actually just, chat with my kids. That experience is what we're looking to create within primary care, because what that does is it elevates me from, clicking on boxes to the point of actually providing care. Because we spend, a lot of money paying a lot of smart people to do very dumb things. And it's not just me, it's my staff too, right? Like my staff members have to sit there and click mindlessly through a fax inbox and reconcile data, whereas they can use that time because they have the skill set to actually interact with patients and create a wholehearted, fisted experience for those patients. And so, just by saying, okay, well, your staff can do it. Yeah, but then I take that time from the staff, and now the staff can't be there for my patients too, to create that whole experience, right?
Well, and I think that's kind of part of like the big problem, especially with, and I don't know if there's any voice AI startups in chat, but like ourselves included, we do some of this as well. I think that like the main thing that you actually want to give staff is the ability to like interact and deliver joy to patients. And I think that like I sit in Karthik's practice a lot, like because we hang out whenever I'm in Massachusetts. I'm like, oh, let me come by the practice just because I love sitting there. And there's a specific interaction that I'm remembering where, we're like joking about, like we're having fun, and the patient's also having fun. And like he went in for his appointment, he talked to Karthik, he had a good time, and on the way out, he was like, man, like you guys this is like so interesting. Like you guys are so happy at this practice. Like everyone's smiling. Like what's going on? Like all the other practices I go to, everyone's like, oh, so sad. Like woe is me. And I was like, man, like if by owning a lot of the work that the staff has to do as a means to like amplify their ability to deliver for patients, and it's not even like because Karthik's office manager's name is Rita. So like Rita, for example, she like like sometimes she has to go to war for patients. Like she has to go and educate them on how like their payer is doing certain things. She'll call the payer and be like, hey, here's like what's going on. Here's why there's a problem. And like, it's interesting just because I think that like a lot of her time is not actually able to be allocated towards that because it's eaten by all of this other stuff that like prevents her from doing that. And there's a specific example I'm thinking about where there was a patient who wanted a referral to gastroenterology, and that patient didn't actually know which physician they wanted to be referred to. They just had like the site, and actually because of the way the scheduling system at that gastroenterologist office worked, like they never actually gave them the specific physician that they'll be seeing. Instead, they said like, hey, here's the block, make sure you get a referral from your patient, from your provider. And like Rita was like, hey, we need an NPI so that we can do this insurance referral. And like, so trying to help out, because we first session. So like we tried to help the patient out and be like, hey, we can like try to figure out how to do this, but we just needed the NPI. And like the patient now has to go back and forth with this site to figure out like what's going on. And the problem is that the site is also like bandwidth constrained and trying to figure out what's going on. And so now like the complexity is compounding, where like in Rita's case, I was like, hey, what do we want to do with this patient? And Rita was like, they kind of just like have to figure it out, because there's not like, if we spend the like hour to like figure out how to go to this, like pick up the phone and be like, hey, we have this patient, we need to like make sure that they are seen in this particular, especially when like there's a need for it. Because actually this patient had just been, this was the thing. This patient had come out of the ED recently. And so we were like, okay, well, hey, we want to make sure that they're actually seen in this time span. And so it's like, I think that it allows for staff to do the highest leverage things that otherwise they don't have an ability to do right now. And like spend the time on patient tasks that like are required to make it happen. You know what I mean? And like, I think that that is what the practice actually can do to deliver that content experience, especially because right now, like, there's not an ability to do that,
And I would say, like, if anything, the technology, the AI actually makes me more human rather than, and Rita more human, because Rita's not having to like sit there and spend hours just, talking about NPI numbers and sitting on hold and this and that, right? That human interaction is unlocked by utilizing technology in the way we have.
Exactly. And so, any other thoughts on this? Otherwise, I'm going to go to like, I bet the audience is like, okay, cool. Like, you're telling me all this stuff is going to happen. Now, like, give me the real, like, what's actually going on, And so I think that the next thing that we want to talk about is like, we've actually, and we've like shown that this is an actual possible thing. And so even in our case, like we, Metro West Healthcare Alliance, they're an independent physician association. They manage about like 40,000 lives. They have a bunch of primary care practices. And so there's two things that I want to like maybe go over, and then I'll let JD and Karthik layer in their perspective actually. The first thing was that once you have, and this is a big unlock, once you have agents that can log into computers, they can also log into EHRs, which means that the ability to do things on top of those EHRs effectively becomes commoditized. And so when you're dealing with, like in our case, we have, 11 different EHRs, it was like, oh, well, okay, we can onboard these practices and get into their EHRs almost automatically. And one of them is like on Amazing Charts, which is this very like old EHR that requires a VPN and is like on the, meaning like you actually have to get a separate like virtual, like another VPN to tunnel into their system. And then two, it is sitting, their EHR is like sitting on their computer running in their office all the time. And so it was like, oh, interesting. Like now we can actually have, where before they actually like have to allocate certain times where staff can use the computer. We were like, well, actually we can spin up a computer that is logging into their instance of that EHR completely remotely, and have an agent go and work on top of that EHR, which effectively would be impossible otherwise. Like we would have to hire a literal like virtual assistant in the Philippines or in India or like wherever, and be like, or in America, and be like, hey, like you are gonna like get this software on your system. You're gonna like use this computer and you're gonna like click on these buttons to go and do things. And so that's the first unlock, which is like, oh, okay, we can get into these EHRs and we can onboard them extremely quickly across. The second thing, and I'll let maybe like Jenny and Karthik tell this story around like, actually, yeah, like tell a story. I feel like it could be around like.
Left it up there.
Wait, which one? Which story? So many stories.
Let me do an intro sentence to the story so we can.
No, like tell the story. I think specifically, tell the story about like the problem that we were having, and then two, yeah, like maybe frame the problem, right? Which was hey, it's coming to the end of the year. What's up?
Yeah, no, I probably can figure it out from the slides you're talking about here, right? So, I mean, if you look at that first box there, right, the onboarding and practices, multiple EHRs, right? Like, so what essentially happened was this, okay? So I'm also the medical director for the IPA. So we were, get into the fall, just like all of you guys, it's the end of the year. Suddenly you're like, realize, oh crap, it's October. October's close to January. Oh, we actually have to do some of these things. So suddenly it's October, you get a list from our network. It's like, hey, these are your gaps. And it's like, okay, we need action. And we had a plan. It was a human plan as a line. That plan didn't pan out. So we were like, okay, well, that sucks, and it's still October, so we need to figure something out quickly. So, we enlisted Mark, and like once again, it was like, and it's not that I don't trust Mark, but it was like, there's no way in hell that you're gonna be able to onboard like how many different EHRs in this much time. But like within a week or two, like everything, like there was a process involved for every one of our distinct individual practices with their own workflows and their own whatever EHRs and random, VPN nonsense. And it was ready to go in no time, right? So immediately from that point, right, the things that each individual practice would typically do at the end of the year, that end of the year push, where we get the list, we then scrub the list and make sure the list is accurate. Then we extract data from various other sources, from all these other systems, because we live in Boston, you can't spit outside the doctor's office without hitting 5 other systems that all have their own EHR, right? So you're pulling stuff all over the place, trying to clean that list. You have a staff member who you're paying overtime on the weekends to sit there and do that. You get this outside list. Now you're going to have to take that list. You're going to have to do outreach, get the patients in and get the orders teed up, do all this stuff to actually get just an A1C. You forget about actually thinking about the diabetes. It's just to get the numbers, right? That's what ends up happening. And that's what's happened for, a decade of me practicing, right? But what's happened is essentially all of that stuff has happened on the back end, right? So the practices are onboarded, the list is digested by a computer, not a person, right? It is scrubbed, and the scrubbing is actually pretty amazing because it not just scrubs like discrete data, it's scrubbing data from like random PDFs that are flipped sideways and some this and that, but it's pulling all of that and putting it into the right spot. So it's creating like a background like database that is now updated all on the side, right? And then it's actually putting forward the actions for the provider. So it's helping with the scheduling. We have a process for that, to get people in, get their codes, whatever. But it's also teeing up the order so that the provider, their cognitive skills, it's stuff that I spent $300,000 worth of debt to do of signing orders. Like actually, I just have to sign orders. Like I don't have to think about it, because then what I'm waiting for is those results to come in so I can use that $300,000 worth of debt towards actually helping the patients achieve goals, right? And the same goals are the ones that align with our payers and our contracts and everything else, right? So in a short period of time, and I'm presuming, Mark, you have like, screen sort of shares of some of this processes, we've condensed what each individual practice had to do on their own within a greater construct, systematized it without each practice having to learn a new thing, right? Each practice just does their thing. I'm just doing the same thing I did before, except all this other stuff is happening on the back end, right? I don't have to get on Epic. I don't have to buy a new software. I don't have to buy a new login. I don't have to do any of that stuff. My day-to-day was the same kind of thing. I just pop in, see my patients, whatever. All this stuff happens on the back end. And then everything is getting done, in like an amazingly short amount of time. I don't know if you want to add anything else to that.
Yeah, Jenny, if you want to add anything, otherwise I'll like double click on kind of what Karthik said. I don't know, was there any thoughts you had there?
Yeah, I think so. There, it's like in some ways it was 2 problems that presented. I think most of us are familiar with that Q4 push, right? Like where there's a 90-day claims lag, and we're chasing these metrics and the coding that I sort of alluded to earlier. And so I think the question that was posed was, is there a way, because I think most people are familiar with the RAF gap closure. So let's say you have all this data, whether or not you use you know, an Excel spreadsheet or you have some pop health tool, there are data points coming in from claims that show you these are the codes that have been coded in this calendar year, and we can compare them to the codes in the prior year. And the goal is actually, I mean, I've heard a number at least thrown out that 90% risk code recapture is the target, which, like, as a clinician, I'm like, not every person's disease carries forward every year, but let's just say the target is 90% recapture of codes that have been billed in the last 1 to 2 years. How do you get, in a heterogeneous network with multiple EHRs, multiple private practices, and even in our employed practices with multiple users, how do you get those codes for each of those patients into the chart? And I think this is where we get down to the atomic actions, right? You've got a list of risk codes that have to get into the EHR, but you have to let the doctor know that those are the codes that have to be coded. And so where do you put them in the chart if there's not a note that's been open, because the patient hasn't actually been scheduled? So you have to actually find the codes, identify which patients haven't had a visit, bring them in for an annual wellness visit, put the codes in a certain place, have the documentation that's required to go so that you can drop the claims in a legal sort of compliant way, so that you actually get credit for that. And we joke all the time. We say, like, you know, boobs don't grow back when you've had a bilateral mastectomy. Why can't we just know that the patient in their history is status post bilateral mastectomy, right? Like, these are all the steps that, like, we haven't been able to standardize. There's this, and I think that's why everybody's pushing towards Epic or pushing towards one giant, everybody has to be on the same EHR, because then you can standardize the process of how we get the risk codes in. But you throw in amazing charts, which I still don't even understand the problem with the VPN, but, like,
you're gonna be really pissed if the CEO for Amazing Charts is chilling in this.
No. I mean, I think people really like amazing charts because it's easy to use, but it doesn't integrate with it. So now we're like, everybody's got their highlights.
Like, that's the thing. It's like actually a really good EHR, but the ability to get into it is impossible.
Yeah,
that's right. That's right. It's
and you're not going to always convince everybody to get on Epic, right? I mean, for me, like, it would.
Correct.
You know, I mean, it would take a lot for me to go on Epic, because it is.
We'll just leave it there. Yeah. But, like, the point being is that the problem seemed easy. Like, the ask was, let's just get these codes in. The patients have these diseases. We're treating them for these diseases. But how do you actually break that all down into all of the atomic actions that need to happen? And it's like that analogy of, like, the Swiss holes in the cheese all line up, and then you just lose it. And the doctors get really frustrated because they're like, I didn't go into medicine to drop these codes. So what the solution here was using this computer usage agent to actually, like, clean up the list, pull it, check the EHR, put it into the EHR, drop put the codes there, so that all the doctor needed to do was confirm that these were the codes that they needed dropped. And that was just the first pass. If we can get more sophisticated over time, and this was a Q4 push, right? It was my understanding of how you built it out. But 2026, if you guys in your sandbox decide you want to run this all the time, and you want to run through the EHR as a source of truth and couple it with your source of truth from claims data, and you pair it, you should be more accurate. I think the goal is not the risk recapture, it's the accuracy of who the patient really is. Right?
And you can do it in a more organic way, right? So, you know, if I see somebody in March, you know, I see them, I do my thing and take care of them, presumably. And then, you know, I code what I'm going to code, right? There may be some codes that happen before or maybe after, but we're not aware of it till November. And then it's like, oh, bring this person in. Is there a reason to bring this person in? Oh, blah, blah, blah. Like, so there's all these other dynamics that come into play that if you can run the process, like, there's no reason not to start January 1st. Like, don't wait till October, right? Start January 1st, run the process. You know your patients for the most part. You know codes that existed. You can at least prompt things. You can at least start to capture things from the get-go. So at the end of the year, you're not scrambling, right? And then the one other thing I want to add to Jenny is like, you can do all of those processes, but in the end, even if you're on Epic, right, and Epic, it does all this fancy schmancy stuff, is that you get to that last step, right? That where it's like, okay, here, there's a bunch of codes. That's what happens traditionally, right? The old code, they just copy and paste a bunch of codes from some claim thing and say, here, code these things. And then me as a provider, I'm like, this doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. I don't know what some random doctor put some random code somewhere. I'm not going to put that in. So then it doesn't get coded because I need the proof in that moment, right? But by pulling the codes, helping identify where those codes come from, which providers have coded externally, it allows, not just me, but also the agents to help me extract that data so that I can prove to myself as a physician that I can appropriately code it, not just to mindlessly code just for the sake of coding, just to get a 90%, right? Because that final step is also a problem, right?
That's right. And I would say that this is not the best example. I just want to put that out there. I think our next example is actually better because there are companies who do this already. There are plenty of coding companies that are actually leveraging AI, pulling the data. So this is maybe not the best place to start.
But I will say that, but it keeps it isolated, right? So because that is a distinct point solution. That's one bullet, coding, but that doesn't solve your A1C problem, doesn't solve your hypertension.
No, right. But I'm saying in this situation, I think the take home was that this solution was not as elegant as from my experience. I've seen risk coding companies that are leveraging AI, but the fact that this was built in a week, I think speaks to the flexibility. Mark, from my understanding, you're not trying to sell a coding solution, right? In fact, you may recognize that there are other companies out there that are doing this. So this is, we don't need to sort of explain to the audience probably how this coding solution works. It's really more about the flexibility of computer usage agents that can do some of these tasks very, very quickly. Maybe not as sophisticated as some of the other companies who are only in that coding space, because I've seen some really slick products out there that are doing pretty amazing things. But I think the next example of the human interaction taking care of patients with diabetes is a better example of how the computer usage agent might string some atomic actions together, right? Because risk coding is quite discrete, but yeah, go ahead.
Well, so yes, that's why I agree. I mean, I think it's good to frame out here's a piece of the pull and the push is what I'll frame really quickly. So in the risk code example, it was okay. Well, hey, let's pull one of the date of their next AWV, right? Or their next annual. Let's pull this information out. And then it's pushing corresponding actions. And that doesn't only apply for risk coding, it also applies to the quality measures that we'll go through right now. Because the next challenge was well, hey, we have A1Cs, we have blood pressures, we have all these things that are sitting within our EHRs that we need to pull out. So in the case of quality measures specifically, there could be 4 failure states. One is that the doctors didn't know that patient had an A1C that needed to get done and therefore didn't do it and didn't tee up that order, right? 2 is that the doc did what they were supposed to do, but and more likely the patient didn't do what they were supposed to do. So they didn't go to the endocrinologist or didn't get it scheduled or whatever it is. 3 is that the doctor did what they were supposed to do, the patient did what they were supposed to do, but the endocrinologist never sent us back that information by way of and it's sitting somewhere in the, and that's fine. Or 4, the endocrinologist did send us back that information, but it's sitting in the fax inbox somewhere that we never realized that they sent it back. In all 4 of those cases, we don't have that information. Or 2, that money's gone. Right. And I think the interesting thing, and this is kind of why it's more fascinating, is we were able to say, okay, well, hey, let's have a computer usage agent and similarly click through the EHR, find out has there actually been an order that's been submitted? Yes. Oh, that's been sent. Yes, no. If yes, did we receive a result for that lab order? Right. And if we received a result, what's the value? Pull it out. Right. And so if no lab order, let's tee up that order for the physician to just be able to click done. And if lab order but no result, it might mean that like we have to go and reach out to that patient, get them scheduled, or we reach out to the endocrinologist and try to get that record back. And so it's like, oh wait, interesting. You can push things, you can pull things out and use that as a means to push things in. And that's not only applicable for A1Cs, that's applicable for all sorts. Like, I mean, we're doing hypertension right now for the same set of reasons. And that's actually like not a field that like needs to be flipped upside down, all this crazy stuff as a means to like make things happen. It's okay. I know we have 10 minutes left, so I want to be sensitive to that.
Can I just add one more thing to that A1C is that in real time, the practice doesn't have the ability to check every single day. Did the lab get done? Did the lab get done? But when you use the computer agents, you can run this every day. So you're always constantly scouting. So let's say it's been 7 days since you ordered that lab test and it hasn't, then you can get the agentic, scheduler to call and say, hey, a lab order was ordered 7, but otherwise it's a lot of this data searching that needs to be run on repeat, but we don't have the technology that empowers staff to be freed of checking for lab results, following up, calling the patient. Did you lose the lab referral? Can we fax you a new one? Right? All of that stuff, if it's automated, will get you to your results faster because it's not the PCP, I would say for the vast majority of the time, it's not because the PCP didn't order the A1C. It's because the PCP doesn't have the time to check every day whether or not the patient who said, yeah, I'm going to go next week to check the EHR every single time. But if you can run this over and over and over, the load that's taken off of the staff to meet these quality metrics, which is the right thing to do for the patient, becomes so much easier.
And that loop closure is part of it, right? Like as you are seeing, like a patient comes in, like there's so many points where the plane can crash, right? Because patient comes in, they have their appointment scheduled. That's where I'm going to grab everything, but I have to go to an emergency, or they have to go to an emergency. The appointment gets canceled and it has to get rescheduled. Maybe they say they'll call back and it doesn't get rescheduled. Now you don't capture anything. You don't have that. So you have to do these things on the back end in order to ensure that you capture it. And because there's so many fail states, whereas it's not like a provider not ordering an A1C, it's just circumstances have come together. And my staff have to keep track of the schedule in order to know that this person has to come back in the next week or the next month. Whereas you can have these systems that are providing the backstop to be like, okay, person did not show up for whatever reason. We have a failure state. We need to like reconcile that, fix that in real time within a time limit, so that we're not fixing that in next October, right? Because I mean, the second that I had to, yeah, go ahead.
No, finish your thought.
No.
I think the thing that you made me think about just now is just that like it is coming together around like, okay, well, how do we tie all of these things together, right? Because we can pull out the information around like, hey, when's their next state of ABV? But like there's all of this autonomous work that can go on in the background for that patient to deliver a concierge-like experience for them, that requires like agents doing things on top of the EHR, or like requires it. It's like akin, and I always tell people this. It's like, imagine trying to do client service for 2,000 people. Like, impossible. Like the Goldman Sachs level of client service of like, hey, I'm going to basically do anything that you want, right? Impossible. And so it's like, in this case, yeah, like sure, pulling out the quality measures and pulling out like A1Cs and the dates corresponding to that, and being able to then push in workflows that own that entire workflow is one thing. But it's also that like, oh, interesting, they might have multiple quality measures that need to be met, not only A1Cs. And so it's like, oh, interesting, like we can now treat that person, like we can treat that patient as like a person holistically, and deliver a client service to them in a way that makes them feel good. Right? Yeah, right? Like exactly, because
they become more than just an A1C or a code, right? They actually
taking care of the patient holistically. What a concept.
Yeah, no, it's
right.
No, I know. And like it's funny because we get so like into, oh shit, like this specific thing, this like specific quality measure we need to meet, and like we want to see the number on the graph go up or to the right, right? But I think it's like, man, tying it up, being able to tie this all together and like orchestrating this as a means to be able to like own that workflow as an extension of the practice. And and put a lot of this on autopilot for the practice, so that like a lot of the work that doesn't need to be done by, not even like, that can be done to give that patient that experience and can be done to take it off the physician's plate. That is like, that's the game,
Yeah. Yeah. So we have 5 minutes now. So I don't know, Mark. Do you
show whatever you got to show?
Garrett,
oh wait.
whatever's left.
I think the final thing is
yeah, the final.
like I just wanted to double click on Jenny's point. I think this is how we turn it into like how we make things into like joyful practices, and that's the only way. Which I guess I touched on in the last point. But yeah, what like any questions?
All right. Well, thank you guys so much. Obviously, this is a super energetic conversation, and there's a lot here to discuss. So if you do have a question for any of the speakers today, just go ahead and drop that in now to your module there. There's a place there specifically for questions. Okay, next, first question is this, Mark. How successful have these agents been?
Totally. So I think this is a great question. Like, because for us, we've actually seen that we can get the computer usage agent to be 95% successful just by being able, like what we do internally is I do the workflow first. So like literally I will click around and try to figure out like Karthik's practice. Like I'll do the facts inbox to see what actually needs to happen so that we can then build the computer usage agent on top of that to do the thing. And the time horizon to do it is more like, well, hey, we like record these videos that can then take the atomic actions and basically program the computer usage agent to do that. And so for those workflows that we talked about, so risk adjustment and like for pushing those risk adjustment codes in and pulling out those quality measures and then pushing in lab audit, et cetera, like we've seen almost a 95% success rate. And a lot of the failure states actually were misattributed patients, or the agent didn't log in, like couldn't log in because it got like hit with something or whatever it is. And so a lot of the time, as long as like we give the agent the ability, we are surprised at how successful they've been is maybe the answer. And like, because honestly, when Jenny and Karthik originally asked like, oh, well, hey, for IPA, like, let's see if we can go and make this happen. I was like, man, we might just have to hire. I told him the Monsters Inc. thing. I was like, there's this clip in Monsters, like the scene in Monsters Inc. where I forget his name, the spider guy is like being accused, and he's like, oh man, like she's seen too much, you know? And it's like, but kidnapping, Sully, the monster, is like, but kidnapping children? How could we do that? And the monster guy's like, I will kidnap 1,000 children before I let this company die. It was like the energy that I had. I was like, I'll hire 1,000 VAs, like virtual assistants, to like make it happen. And it turned out like, oh wait, actually we can build a computer system to get the same outcome and do it at scale and do it relatively quickly. And so we've been pretty surprised by that.
This is awesome. Okay, next question here is, can you analyze big data, like 20 to 30 million records?
So I think that like, yes, we can. I would want to start, it depends on what EHR you're on. We'd want to start with like specific sets of data, like in the same way that, like hypothetically, there might be like, in those records, so let's say for our IPA alone, right? Like in those individual records, we might be able to pull from that individual record thousands of fields of information, or thousands of pieces of information. And so I think, yes, depending on the type of information that you're trying to get. And I would want to scope that first to figure out for you, like what actually needs to happen. And that's kind of what we do initially, just to make sure that like we actually can be helpful. Because at the end of the day, like if we don't think we can be helpful, then there's not really a need to engage, you know?
But just to clarify though, I think when I heard that question, what I heard was, can you analyze big sets of data, not necessarily in the EHR, but just like millions and millions of lines of pop health data claims data to actually garner insights? And I actually think the current AI technology, from my limited experience, is already able to do that, which is different than the atomic actions that the computer usage agents would be doing. So analyzing big data actually doesn't need a computer usage. That's actually like a lower level module of AI.
It's just data science.
It's just data, right? Exactly. That's my understanding. If that's what the question is, but I think for me, it's more like, are we burning down the Amazon rainforest and killing the environment as we leverage AI? But that's a whole other conversation.
No, you're right. That's totally right.
They just specified EHRs, what they were specifically talking about, but
inside the EHR, yeah. Okay.
I mean, in some ways, it's even easier if it's inside one EHR too, right? But it's basic thing. The funnel, you create the funnel. Extracting that data is easy. It's really squeezing it out into an actionable downstream event that is always where people fall apart. So that's where Mark is able to take it to that next level.
Gotcha. Well, speaking of taking it to the next level, you guys definitely have taken it to the next level on this presentation today, and we are out of time, unfortunately. So I want to thank you, Dr. Ravindran, Dr. Chiang, Mark. I mean, this is awesome and an energetic, fun discussion. And wanted to also thank you for tuning in and listening to us today, spending some of your afternoon with us. If you would like to get in touch with the Beacon Health team. Mark's information is here on the screen. And so you can send him an email or shoot him a text in the middle of the night too is great. He loves that.
He does. He doesn't sleep.
That's right. Feel free to reach out to me too if you would like. I'm happy to facilitate an introduction. But I wanted to thank you all again for hanging out with us today. We hope you join us on the next one. A little survey is about to pop up. So if there's anything specific you'd like to know about or hear more about on a future session, let us know. But otherwise, have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye-bye now.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.